Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar. During the next 45 minutes, our panel of speakers will discuss the cybersecurity challenges facing the travel industry as it emerges into a post-pandemic world. We'll explore just what changes have arisen in the last 12 months and how they are likely to impact an array of travel organisations, from hotels and hostels to airlines. In the final 15 minutes of today's session, we'll be answering any and all questions you might have throughout the webinar. So please do add them to the chat box. Right, let's introduce today's panel. Joining us from the digital marketing agency Spike, we have Director and Co-CEO Duncan Coleman. Duncan brings a wealth of experience from his 14+ years of working with household name travel organisations, helping them to develop effective organic, paid, social media and PR strategies. From Netacea, we have Matthew Gracie McMinn, our Head of Threat Research, who is an experienced cyber threat intelligence professional with a Master's in Philosophy from the University of Oxford, and Graham Harvey, our Lead in Enterprise Sales for Travel. Over the last 5 years, Graham has specialised in working with world-renowned airline brands and travel agents to secure their business and their customers against the growing bot threat. So on that note, right over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Danny, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Now, obviously, the travel sector has been hit very hard during the pandemic, and in this webinar, we hope to shed some light on how we see the landscape changing as we move out of the travel restrictions and beyond. And today, we'll be starting with an overview of the bots affecting the travel market, looking at the current state of affairs and insights from Duncan, and then Matt will delve into more detail and findings related to the key bot attacks that we expect to see. Next slide. So how are we defining bots? Well, bot traffic is the requests made by automated processes or scripts as opposed to being made by humans. Now, that bot traffic will ultimately be made up of a wide range of goods and bad bots, and being able to accurately distinguish between these bots and their intent is the key to taking control of unwanted malicious traffic without affecting either the good bots that your business needs or genuine human users. Now, the travel industry is one of the most severely affected by bad bots and has been since the advent of online travel. And in some cases, we've seen upwards of 80% bad bot traffic on websites. Now here, we've listed the common good and bad bots that we see on travel websites and APIs and mobile apps. And obviously, there are many good bots that you need for the steady running of your website and your business. And it's important that these aren't negatively affected by any bot management solution that you're using. Often bot writers will try to spoof some of these services, hoping that you don't want to risk blocking them. An example would be fake Google bot. Now, we've seen over the years that the line between good and bad actors in the travel industry can get blurred. And a common example of this is where you may have a partner who is using your official APIs during allowed hours, but also scraping data unofficially at other times. Now, turning our attention to the bad bots, travel companies face the full range of automated threats, but the key ones that come up again and again as causing the biggest problems are number one, price and availability scrapers. Now, these not only cause travel companies lost competitive advantage, lost control of the customer, and lost revenues, but also the aggressive scraping can lead to severe performance issues. For example, slow trip search times, which has a really negative effect on the customer experience and customer retention, as well as potentially impacting SEO ratings. And of course, there's always the real risk that all of these extra requests are causing issues with third-party services, such as increased costs and service availability. Next, we have account takeover, which is typically done via credential stuffing. This is often used to abuse loyalty programs, which can lead to the loss of real money balances, air miles, as well as theft of PII data. Now, finally, ticket spinning. This is where the tickets are held for a period of time to generally see if the bot writer can sell them on a higher margin. And this blocks real users from being able to purchase and can be used as a type of denial of service attack. So next slide. So now, let's take a look at how we see the travel market, and specifically in relation to bots, how we see that developing moving forward. So Duncan, how do you think the online travel companies are going to cope after effectively being shut down for the last 12 months?
Hi, Graham. Yes, so I think firstly it comes down to your ability to be agile, really. So planning in real time is obviously difficult, but I think the companies that are able to do that will be the companies that win out. So there have been quite a lot of team structural changes where individuals have had to cover more than one position, and certainly sort of pre 30th of September, where unfortunately team members might still be on furlough. That type of agility, I think, is absolutely key. And then surges in website activity. In the last 12 months, we've seen sort of paid media traffic on websites increase by a factor of 10-fold within 24 hours. And so prerequisite when you're in that situation is having the the correct bandwidth, having the server setup, the server management in place to be able to process the traffic effectively and quickly. And also in our area of digital marketing, the opportunity of reactive PR is a really interesting one. Journalists love talking about the travel industry right now in terms of key trends and advancements which can bring some amazing PR opportunities on high authority newspaper websites, sites like The Guardian, the BBC, for example. And then budgeting, I think, being able to have less of a kind of hard cap in place. So when those surges come where there's high intent to buy, being able to allow the website to to transact and to sell at the upper limit without having any sort of restrictions in place, because it's in those situations where you can really make an improvement in terms of overall result to cash flow and the bottom line. We've seen cost per click amounts reduce in Google Ads by up to 50%, 30 to 50% typically, which again brings a good opportunity, but simultaneously you've got to be able to react from a budget perspective in case the market, the advertising kind of costs shift up, because at those times where bookings are really strong, you want to be there, you want the most visibility. Finally, I think marketing a destination safety is going to be something that increasingly OTAs are going to be doing. So I looked at a survey by Google last year where consumers over the age of 56 are most likely to have health concerns regarding all travel offerings. Now that picture will undoubtedly change, attitudes will change, but certainly age is quite a key factor when it comes to buying decisions relating to travel and tourism. So I think it's all of those things really.
Cool, thanks Duncan. We go to the next slide. So we've now covered the bots that affect the travel industry, and Duncan's given us an overview of some of the challenges. Let's now start to understand how they're going to affect the travel industry for the rest of the year and beyond. So turning to you, Matt, what bot-specific challenges are we predicting to hit the travel industry?
All right, yeah, thanks, Graham. So really, we don't see that there's going to be a huge difference from what we were seeing in previous years, pre-COVID, really. In many ways, the travel industry has been hit very hard by COVID. Similarly, so have the adversaries, those performing these sorts of bot attacks, have similarly been hit quite hard by this. The sort of drop off in travel means that many of them have had to diversify and start targeting other organizations. E-commerce has been a popular choice for some of the groups that we see launching these sorts of targeted attacks. Other groups as well, we don't really see much in the way of suggestions of change in these sorts of tactics, techniques, processes, their TTPs that we're expecting them to use. So really, we're expecting the same threats in 2021 as in previous years. That sort of the really sort of top three really being sort of price and availability scraping, denial of inventory, and your typical ATO or account takeover attacks, things like credential stuffing, credential cracking, and phishing. These are the sorts of techniques that are sort of the bread and butter for these organizations, for these groups who are launching these attacks, or sometimes individuals. Some of them are more legitimate than others. Account takeovers, generally speaking, are going to be very illegitimate. Price and availability scraping, some of those are quite legitimate and often partnered with companies in the travel industry. However, we do think that for these people doing these sorts of activities, there isn't really much of a need for them to change their TTPs. The industry is pretty much sort of going to hopefully return to normal, maybe sort of pick up a bit. And as things pick up, these people want to start getting some of the money they've lost over the last year. They're going to want to, jump on the back of increasing numbers of people looking to travel now that they finally can again, go on those holidays they've been planning for over 12 months. So they're really going to jump on this in the same way that other people have. So we're expecting the same sorts of threats we've seen before, but probably an increase in volume, possibly an increase in sophistication as different groups and organizations start to compete with one another to be the best in their sort of in their sort of attacking sort of methodologies. And we're possibly seeing an increase in speed as they refine those methodologies and they do become more sophisticated, and as the number of bookings being performed do increase as well. So really what I would like to do is sort of have a bit of a deep dive into some of these attacks. And if we start with that sort of elephant in the room, the price and availability scraping one, if we jump onto the next slide, please. So moving on to the next slide, you'll see that, as we all know, web scrapers are generally used to gather information off the internet. They're used across a wide variety of industries. Quite often it's the same tools being used to hit e-commerce or gaming sites as it is the travel industry. However, in the travel industry, the sorts of information that our adversaries are after are things like price information, the cost of hotels, the cost of flights, whatever the cost of bookings, cost of holiday packages, all of that information, and also the availability. They want to know who has what slots available. And this sort of scraping generally is going to be performed by aggregate sites. On the most probably sort of aggregate sites, many of whom are partners, they're legitimate, they're allowed. Some perhaps significantly less so on the whole. But you also get rival companies potentially performing scraping, looking for sort of discrepancies, opportunities for them to maybe undercut you, or maybe to see if you're possibly, pricing things very, very low. Business intelligence information, really, that's the sort of thing they may be looking for there as well. So there's all these sorts of scraping. And on the next slide, I've got a graph here of a scraping attack targeting a travel company, somewhat anonymized. And what you can see here is actually how sophisticated we do find it. You see there's quite a significant number of requests going to this travel company over the course of about 8 days there. And on each day, you can see pickups at certain times. Looks like the sort of pickups tend to be in the daytime, at least UK time. So we're seeing pickups at certain times of the day, presumably when people are awake, and it drops off overnight. That's the sort of thing you'd expect from humans. But if you look at the orange line there, you'll see that the scraper is actually mimicking that behavior quite well. These scrapers they're often trying to mimic human behavior, and that comes back to that point on sophistication. These adversaries, they are going to try and hide their activity within your sort of standard sort of behavior. They're going to do what they can to try and make it look as human as possible. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more advanced bots, not just of the scraping variety, but of all varieties, but scrapers as well, which traditionally have been a very simple sort of, we're going to do, say, 10,000 requests every hour forever. Now they're starting to sort of much more recently, they've started being a bit more specific, possibly rotating IPs as well to try and make it less clear that all that information is going back to the same place. There's sometimes user behavioral analytics. They may move the mouse or not make requests sort of consistently over that time frame. There's all sorts of different tricks they can use to try and bypass the sort of simpler detection controls, which really kind of brings us on to the risks on the next slide then. So as I've alluded to already, there's always danger that rivals may gather business intelligence, but that's kind of the risk of doing business in many ways. That you can try and stop it making that so easy for your competitors, but at some level, they could always just put someone on to actually go on your webpage and have a look. A human could always go and do it manually. There are other dangers though, and the next one really for me is one of the big ones, which is that other bots tend to use the information gathered by scraper bots to launch their attacks. So other bots such as spinner bots or denial of inventory bots, other sorts of adversaries, other sorts of attacks will take the information from the web scrapers to help inform and make decisions around subsequent stages of the attack. And this sort of staged attack we refer to as the kill chain. And if you can stop the kill chain, that is, if you can break the chain, you can kill the chain at this scraping stage, you can stop the later, much more dangerous sorts of attacks earlier here. Denial of inventory is a bit harder to perform if the earlier bot can't give the information to the secondary bots that it needs in order to perform that attack. There's also then some sort of concerns around false analytics. If you're looking at how many people are looking at this destination, how many people are looking at this hotel, how many people are looking at this flight, you might be getting an inaccurate number of people viewing that information. If a web scraper's been quite aggressive in particular, it could be shooting the numbers of people up well above where they actually are, which could lead you to making sort of false decisions, sort of badly informed decisions, badly informed sort of steps in terms of strategic direction of the organization, perhaps. There's also risks around sort of negative impact on user experience and also damage to sort of website performance and search engine optimization. And Duncan, for you, I was hoping to sort of pick your brain a bit on sort of how this sort of scraping could really impact websites and their performance.
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly from an SEO perspective, Google are committed to ranking websites higher that have a better user experience. So, in the example of a user connecting to a website via a smartphone with a 3G or 4G connection and lands on the website and it loads slowly, and this is clearly a kind of bad user experience. So if the load speed and the stability of the page is impaired by kind of bot activity, then that would impact negatively on what we refer to as the core Web Vitals scores, which is set to be Google's latest blueprint for UX ranking signals from sort of June 2021. So certainly from an SEO perspective, this is going to be of growing importance. And then obviously there's the overall sort of user experience, which is that for holiday makers, it's quite a big decision, which website and which provider, which travel company you go with. And so any little sort of thing that could cause friction in terms of instability of a web page loading, then you could lose that sale. So two massive points really.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. So yeah, that as well should be a concern. That lost sales are never ideal. So that kind of really does bring us onto the next point really, which is the next type of attack, the denial of inventory attack. And this is the sort of attack we see being performed by what we call spinner bots. But essentially, in a denial of inventory attack or a DOI, essentially what an attacker is doing, an adversary is doing, is they're going to hold an item from stock, but they're not going to actually complete the purchase. Now, this is seen again across multiple industries, and like I said at the start, people have, some of these attackers have over the course of COVID had to diversify into other industries. They're launching these sorts of bot-based activities is their day job, but now that the travel industry is sort of opening back up, it's sort of poised to recover. They're likely to sort of descend back onto their original target. We're seeing a bit of chatter around that on some of these sort of forums, some of these areas, that they're looking forward to getting back to their more familiar ground and not having to compete in other industries they're less familiar with. So it is one of the most common. Although it is seen in other industries, though, this denial of inventory attack really is seen most commonly in the travel industry. And how it works is a little bit of a cycle. If we look on the next slide, you'll see that we start at the top there with the bot. Essentially goes onto a site. It emulates a customer. It tries to pretend to be a customer, and it creates a reservation. Once it gets through there, it starts setting it all up, and it gets right to the point of payment, at which it halts. And generally speaking, at this point, the reservation is going to be held for that customer, or in this case, the bot. It's held for varying lengths of time, generally about 20 minutes, I believe. And in that 20-minute period, the adversary is going to look for a reset, look to try and resell that booking. So they'll go onto other sites, they'll list it up at a suitably marked up price. So if the flight is, say, £50, they will go off to another site and maybe advertise it at £55 or £60. So they'll take a bit of a cut. And they'll have multiple bots going through this process at once. If they are unable to resell it in that period, the reservation will drop out of their basket. So let's say 20 minutes expires, they're unable to resell it in that period, it drops out of the basket. So the bot then has sort of failed in its intended purpose. Unfortunately, not quite that simple, really. The bot will, far faster than any human can react, essentially restart the whole circle. It will go right back to the start of the reservation process, pick it up and try again. Alternatively, an attacker may have multiple bots running at once, often across multiple sites, making loads and loads of different reservations, trying to resell them all at the same time. So it's quite intensive on the reservation system in many ways, but it also sort of locks out the humans from being able to make the bookings on that site potentially. They have to go to a third-party site where the reseller is being offered. Eventually, the attacker will presumably be able to sell it on the resale site at the marked up price, at which point the bot will simply complete the reservation with the details provided by the actual customer, and essentially act as a sort of a window through, or a sort of hoop they have to jump through to complete that booking. So really, these sorts of attacks are the attackers, as you might guess from the description of the resale happening at a marked up price. Our attackers are after money. They are very financially motivated. So they're really driven by the profitability of these actions. And, acquiring this inventory is really quite low risk, but it can be a very high yield opportunity, a great way for them to make some hard and fast cash. Even if they're only marking it up, say £10 per ticket, if they're selling 50, 100 tickets, they're probably going to be turning quite a significant profit every single time they run through this iteration, on every single trip, every single flight, any single sort of hotel booking. They can really make quite a bit of profit at very, very low risk. It can also be used to send customers from a competitor's website to your own. So please don't take this as an inspiration of what you should be doing yourselves. This is intended more as a warning of what could potentially be used against you. If someone, say, blocks up all your inventory without completing it and just keeps holding it to that sort of reservation area, it's possible that your customers may see there's no availability for that site, for that location, for that trip, whatever it is, that there's no availability for them, and so they'll go to your competitor, and your competitor will, of course, have their availability, and so your customers will see them as the only vendor with availability, and so that competitor can then charge a premium for the fact they're the only ones with availability. Very underhanded, but these sorts of things unfortunately do happen. And then I think finally the last one we have a bit of worrying about, and this is fairly low risk. It's not very often that we do see this happening. It's the denial of inventory attacks causing essentially a denial of service attack. It can can be used as a sort of application layer denial of service attack. It makes the application unusable. It's fairly low risk in our experience, particularly for bringing down the entire service. But there is always the danger of that, particularly if it's being quite aggressive or possibly a not so well built bot.
So Matt, you've mentioned here a couple of times that denial of inventory attacks can be quite low risk. So what exactly would be your thought on what travel companies need to worry about here?
So for me, really, I think it's sort of an awareness that your customers are potentially, in the same way we saw the scalper industry sort of hit the PlayStation 5 market, and people got really angry. They got somewhat angry at the scalpers, but if you look at Twitter, you'll see them getting really angry at the companies that were stocking the PlayStation 5 for selling them to the wrong people. And it's kind of the same thing that we're seeing here. So people potentially, your brand reputation could be damaged. People can get annoyed at you because you never have availability. You never have availability for the flights they want. You never have availability for the hotels they want. You never have availability for the sorts of holidays they want to go on. It's always sold out. They'll stop coming to you and start going to your competitors. They could go to, say, the third-party sites, or they could go to your competitors. And that then sort of starts driving your direct customers away to other places. It also, if customers are forced to pay over the odds because resellers are taking all these things and marking them all up, or your competitors are being able to charge a premium, they're going to have less money to spend on you. They're also going to potentially be a bit annoyed around there as well. And alternatively, you may be thinking, hey, if people are willing to pay these prices, perhaps we've sort of undercharged. Potentially, and you possibly missing out on being able to actually sell at the resale level of prices yourself. So, there's all of these areas where businesses are potentially sort of missing out or losing, really. And although it is from, in many ways, a sort of technical perspective, it's not going to cause it doesn't cause so much direct damage to the organization, to their website, to the web application, to an API or anything like that. It does, however, introduce some sort of level of business risk, and potentially, you're not using everything you have available to you as well as you could do.
Absolutely. So it comes down to businesses protecting their bottom line by thinking about the overall image of the business, protecting that reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And helping with the customer experience as well. I do the same thing when I'm looking on say a travel website. I want to go on holiday as much as anyone else, and if I find, there are companies I'm like, well, they've never got flights available. I've checked them 3-4 times. The last 3-4 times I've flown, they're never available. I won't bother checking them. I'll go to their competitor instead. It's very easy as a customer to fall into those mindsets.
Absolutely. I think we all have those mindsets, and it's not exclusive to travel either. We're quite flighty consumers.
We are terribly disloyal, yes. So yeah, and that sort of protection of customer actually, thank you, brings us on quite nicely to the final one of those attacks, which personally, as a security professional, is the one I'm most worried by, and that's the account takeover, your ATO attacks. And these are very frequently seen, again, all across all industries. We've seen all sorts of attacks on everything from sort of streaming services, healthcare, e-commerce, gaming sites. If you have a login page, someone's going to be attempting. If you have an online login page, someone's going to be attempting an account takeover on you. There's just scanners that hit every login page on the internet. But in the specific case of travel, what we generally see are sort of 3 main techniques being used as part of the account takeover tactic. The first of these is credential stuffing, where an attacker has credential pairings, often from a third-party data breach. So let's say some streaming service has a data breach, and username and password combinations are leaked. Attackers will load these up into a sort of config, their standard config. They will load these up into a credential stuffing tool, stick in the config specific for your website, and fire it off at your website. And let's say they take 100,000 from this streaming service, known username and password combinations, and they'll fire them against your login page, username, password, and see which ones work. And even if they only succeed, say 100 or 1,000 times, they've managed to take over a large number of accounts, and mostly it works because in many ways the targeted organization is not really at fault at all. They're sort of a victim as well. So the customers reuse that username and password against sort of best of practice and advice. They've reused that username and password across multiple services. And they've also a third-party organization is the one who actually leaked that data. So the victim organization in this attack, it feels a bit bad to blame them in any way, though generally in public they do tend to get blamed. If you say, you see these headlines all the time, 1,000 accounts on site X have been taken over by attackers. Credential cracking is similar to credential stuffing, but it's where they only know, say, one of the user, say just the username, they don't know the password, so they'll try and guess the password instead. And finally, you have phishing, as well as its variants, phishing and smishing and all these other ways of trying to get people to give away access to their accounts. So in these ways, attackers will try and get into an account. So they'll take it over, and once they get in there, what they're really after is a number of different things. So you've got your typical air miles and loyalty points. Those are a pretty significant concern for many organizations, but attackers use them often they'll take over an account and use the air miles, loyalty points, whatever bonus is available on there, in order to make purchases on a third-party site. That makes it really hard to repatriate those points back to the original owner, and the attacker usually gets away scot-free very, very quickly. They may also try to make purchases with saved payment details. That's for, if someone saved a credit card onto your site, an attacker takes over the account, they can use those saved details in order to make purchases. And the final one is actually personally identifiable information, PII. This one is of growing concern, really. More and more, we're seeing these config files I mentioned earlier. The actual part of they're a part of the credential stuffing tool. And when an account is successfully taken over, the tool automatically dives into the account and basically rips out all of the personally identifiable information and exports it off to the attacker to be saved in a separate file elsewhere. And it can be used in future attacks. And obviously that's sort of something of a concern, particularly around data leakage, anything relating to regulations or anything like that. But Duncan, have you found sort of the leaking of PII affecting brand reputation in the past?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, in recent years, in terms of websites being affected by bot activity, we've had problems in terms of websites loading slowly and things. But in the last year, we had fortunately not one of our clients' websites, but one of their competitors had an account takeover, and the negative impact that it had from a brand perspective was quite damning, really. So they get trolled online on social media sites, but then also within the trade, and that's how we heard about it. So there's obviously the negative connotations in terms of something like that can go viral the wrong way in terms of negative PR. But then also within the trade, it's also quite a lasting bad look. So I mean, that type of thing in the here and now could be massively damaging. During the pandemic, brand reputation is, it's been proven to be more key than ever. So if a household name acts in the wrong way from a consumer perspective, they're normally trolled quite obviously, quite publicly. It's been an emotive time, so therefore any type of account takeover, I think, could be really bad. And obviously there's the GDPR kind of side of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The GDPR, as well as in other countries, we're seeing more and more similar legislation coming into force as well. And those fines are also, like you say, they cause brand reputation damage, but they also cause the direct sort of cost. There's also, I've also seen sort of some concerns around the sort of secondary impacts, and these are the sorts of things that aren't often directly thought about when you think of account takeover, and that's more around sort of fixing the issue. Let's say 100,000 accounts being used in a credential stuffing attack is really, really, really low, to be honest. You're often seeing in the millions being thrown as a site. So a success rate of, say, 1% may compromise, say, 1,500 accounts. If it takes 5 minutes to repatriate each of those accounts to their credit owners, get a customer service rep on the phone to the customer who's phoned in to ask, hey, what the hell is going on with my account? You get all of these then so customer service rep spends 5 minutes trying to repatriate the account, not a huge amount of their time. Multiplied by 1,500, that starts to add up significantly. And if it's happening on a regular basis, you're employing a load of staff basically just to put out the fires being started by these types of attacks. And to give you an idea of the sort of scale of these attacks, if you look at the next slide, what you can see here is 2 large bursts of credential stuffing coming from a single source. So we have our light blue on here, which is our other traffic, and our dark blue, which is the credential stuffing. And what you can see is over the period of about 17 minutes, in 2 separate 17-minute bursts, there was a huge uptick in the amount of traffic. And this was caused exclusively by the credential stuffing, with the attacker trying thousands and thousands and thousands of username and password combinations. And to give you an idea of what that actually, what happens when they actually compromise an account, if we look at the next slide. So this shows the amount of activity coming from a single session, essentially, or rather more a sort of single source, single connection. So it tries to get into the account. It's trying to crack the password up until that lovely orange dot at the top of the first uptick there, where it says user account breached. So the account got correctly cracked at that point. So the attacker got in. And 10 minutes later, you can see there were a number of calls to the transaction request page. So within 10 minutes of compromising this account as part of a much broader attack, the attacker was in there trying to make purchases with the saved payment details. These guys, they don't wait around. And even if you're using measures like sending an email saying, hey, you've logged in from a strange location, please click here to confirm this was you. I don't check my email regularly enough to be able to respond to that sort of thing within 10 minutes, certainly not less than 10 minutes, which is what I'd need to if this were my account. So my account got breached here, I got an email, I'd have had to have checked it within sort of 5, 6, 7 minutes in order to get in and sort of lock the attacker out of my account before they start making purchases with my saved payment details. So these attacks are really rapid. These attackers aren't sort of hanging around or using the information later. They're jumping straight in there. As soon as they compromise an account, they're extracting the personally identifiable information, and they are they're immediately trying to make purchases sort of really, really quickly, immediately after compromising the account. They will try to extract as much value from the account as they can as soon as they take it over. So, I mean, that kind of leads me to...
Sorry, Matt, just before we end there. Sorry, I couldn't get to my unmute button fast enough then. So, obviously, we've gone through a lot of information here about ATO attacks and the impact that they can have on businesses. And that was some really great insight from Duncan there on that particular use case. But what would be really interesting to know is a bit more about where responsibility actually lies for protecting accounts from takeover attacks.
Oh, you do like to ask the difficult ones, don't you, Danny? Yeah, so responsibility for ATO attacks is sort of a personal bugbear of mine. And really, I don't think responsibility lies solely at the feet of any one person or organization. As I mentioned, there's sort of 4 parties in these sorts of attacks. So you have your attacker as the first party. You then have a third party who've had a data breach, some other organization somewhere. You've got the customer who's reused their credentials from another place. And then you have the victim company, the sort of company who's being targeted and the accounts on whose site are going to be taken over. So from a credential stuffing perspective, it's kind of hard to say responsibility lies at the foot of any of those except for the attacker. The attacker is definitely responsible and accountable and just acting entirely illegally in this case. In terms of actually defending from it, though, it's we can't affect the third-party organization. They're outside of the scope of what we can do. But in terms of users, we can we can work with them and sort of try to educate our users and make sure that they are following best password practices, proper password hygiene, all of these. There's also services that will tell you, I think Apple do it almost by default on like their iPads and iPhone devices now, tell you by default when your password has been leaked online and try to encourage you to reuse it. Those sorts of services are available. Organizations, I believe, can integrate them as well. And So users really should be taking steps to follow best practices. They shouldn't be reusing passwords and so forth. And when it comes to phishing attacks, they really, they need as well to be aware. They need to look out for the telltale signs. But there's always a risk that the user will be compromised. None of us are perfect. I've been the victim of account takeover attacks from brute forcing and things myself, embarrassing as it is to admit. So there is a sort of area of that as well where it does fall on the organization, and part of that is we as organizations, we want to protect our customers. It's not great for us if our customers are seeing us as an attack vector. Oh, you're the way the criminals get to me. That's never a great marketing line, really. So as business, we can look for the telltale signs of bot activity. We saw on the previous slide the massive uptick in activity from credential stuffing. Credential cracking makes even more noise. We can look for that sort of thing, and some attackers may proxy IPs, use human emulation, or even capture bypass techniques to try and get around the sorts of typical defenses. But there are ways around that. Proper bot management solutions can really help and assist in that area. You can use capture, you can use user behavioral analytics to try and get that low-hanging fruit out anyway. More advanced ones, you may need dedicated bot management solutions. But there's other telltale signs as well. Realistically, in this case, we saw the user account, this many requests to a single user account, and then desperately trying to make a purchase within 10 minutes. That might be particularly unusually fast for your site, say. You may consider from a behavioral perspective, most of our customers actually spend more like half an hour booking a flight. Very few of them will complete the booking within 10 minutes. You may choose to lower that to, most customers don't complete the booking within 2 minutes. Maybe we'll send a sort of confirmation email to them before finalizing the booking, or something like that. There's lots of different small measures you can take. And I think as long as you're taking steps to explain to customers, this is why we're doing it. We're doing this to protect you. Just please go to your email and click that confirm button, or please go to here and just, or please just complete the small extra bit to prove it's definitely you, because the way you've behaved is a bit suspicious, and we want to make sure you're not being impersonated by a criminal in this case. And I think as much as it impedes on the user experience, generally speaking, most users are more in favor of that. They'll happily jump through a small extra hoop just to make sure they're safe and protected, particularly when it comes to their credit card details.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to big ticket items like flights and hotels, you definitely want to have that extra layer of security, because like you said, it's a sacrifice for the business of the user experience, but it's got to be a worthy one when you're thinking long term about protecting that customer's personal information.
Yeah, you're also protecting the organization, to be purely cynical as well. There's if a customer sees that someone else has used their credit card to book say a £5,000 holiday, they're probably going to want to charge that back. And it might be a bit late by that point for the organization, so you can end up in disputes, you can end up losing money on the booking, or possibly it may be too late to get another customer onto that flight or into that room, and so you've lost a bit of money there.
Absolutely, yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. Excellent point. It's that double-edged sword, isn't it, of protecting themselves as well as protecting the customer to protect themselves as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's security is in many ways a sort of we all have to work together, and by protecting each other, we also protect ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Matt.
Thank you. So yeah, so I think that brings us on to the summary. So Graham, would you like to summarize everything we've been over today? Because I think I've been speaking for long enough now.
Yeah, well, it was all good stuff, Matt. Very educational. So I guess, what can we take away from today's webinar? Well, I guess, we don't see too much changing with regards to the type of bot attacks that will hit the travel companies. However, we're definitely expecting that the volume of the bot attacks and the level of sophistication is going to greatly increase as things get back to normal. And what we have to remember is the bad bot services are an industry themselves. They'll have seen their revenues badly hit over the last 12 months, and we're certainly expecting them to come back really aggressively to make up for that lost time. So really, for this reason, it's absolutely critical for travel companies to be prepared and have their bot management defenses in order now, in preparation for what is coming. And of course, we'd be happy to speak with any travel companies at a later date who want to know more about Netacea's bot management solution. Over to you, Danny.
Great, thank you, Graham. So I've got several questions here for the three of you. I'm going to start with you, Duncan. So over the years, how have you seen bot attacks compromise your digital marketing clients?
Sure. Yeah. So we've had a lot of hacks that maybe don't kind of stem necessarily from sort of classic bot activity, but mainly it's been where a website technically has been taken down from bot activity to the point where it loses its pages within the Google index. That's something that we've seen many times. And then I mentioned previously the account takeover, which it's still quite vivid in my mind, really, because that was one that had the saved payment details that Matt was talking about, where there was I think a customer had like £1,500 taken out of their bank account, and whilst that wasn't a travel industry space, it was a niche e-commerce business, and the ramifications of something like that happening were pretty serious in terms of not only the sort of reputational risk, but they also had a period of downtime where they couldn't actually have the website live, and they couldn't transact. So yeah, a myriad of different pictures. And then within travel, we've worked with businesses that I think virtually all of them have got sort of bot management in place, and so very much aware of new scraper bots popping up, new sort of aggregators popping up that are scraping the site. So very much like an ongoing challenge on that side.
That's really good to hear that there is generally some sort of bot protection in place to catch, even if it is just catching the low-hanging fruit, but being aware of the various different types of scraper activity is great. So another one for you. So how can marketers in the travel industry effectively plan their strategy in 2021 while remaining flexible? So I think you mentioned that you touched on this before, the fact that the landscape is changing all the time at the moment, and very unpredictably.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and we in our line of work we get asked this all the time in terms of asking for forecasts and targets, and outside of a pandemic that can be pretty challenging work, and then it becomes even more challenging within a sector that's been as hit as travel has been. But some things that I think really stand out in my mind, like I said earlier, driving the reservations and the bookings when they're there, I think is absolutely key. So having a robust setup that does encapsulate bot management, I think is increasingly important, because the use case of having more accurate analytics is something throughout the team at Spike that we're increasingly interested in, because whether it's an in-house digital marketing team or an outsourced digital marketing agency, we all spend lots of time looking at web metrics. Excuse me. And so then outside of that, I think I've seen a lot of activity where people are trying to drive sales, bookings during sort of 2022, 2023. I think that's all really sort of sound proactive activity. Driving evergreen content that's around destinations, as I said, I mentioned before, this sort of concept of like safety within marketing messages and content. I think is really good to sort of identify those sort of pain points. But I think in summary, really, when the traffic is there, you really need to be able to go for it and not have any sort of limitations in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think particularly, like you're saying, the evergreen content that will ensure that visibility, so that as soon as the traffic hits, you're there and you're ready to capture all of that, capture all the traffic, capture all those people searching at the poignant times.
Definitely. I mean, we saw last year a lot of businesses that knew that they were going to be seriously hit move a lot of their activities from paid into organic search and organic social media, even kind of like CRM through email marketing. So sensible companies that will be around for a long time start to think about that kind of customer relationship management piece, protecting their brand and really spending more time on the nuts and bolts of SEO and usability, so that they're ready when people have high buying intent.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because it's almost more important to make sure the organic presence is there at times like this than having the paid media spend. So obviously you need to have that ready, but the organic presence is what's really going to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. And Graham, one for you next. So you talked a lot about risks for businesses associated with scraping attacks. How does this impact sales? So in particular, auxiliary sales such as car rental, insurance.
Yeah, well, ancillary sales can make a massive difference to travel companies' profits. And that can be anything from upgrades, car rentals, insurance, tourist trips. And if these sales are placed on a non-official OTA site, then the airline or hotel will not only lose control of that customer in their CRM, but they're also going to miss out on some or all of those ancillary opportunities, and they can really add up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably something that not a lot of us would think about, because if you're using an aggregator to make a booking, you are probably already planning your trip in different parts. So you might book a flight, then book a hotel with a separate service, and then book any transport or insurance again separately. But if we think about the big providers, there are associated costs there with those auxiliary sales that will absolutely be impacted by this.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much for that.
If you don't mind me jumping in very quickly there, Danny, actually, because I think Graham and I were talking actually before the webinar about some of the impacts of scraping on travel organisations generally, and you were sharing quite a few sort of interesting little tidbits, Graham. For the benefit of the audience, would you mind sort of talking us through some of those a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. I mean, yeah, you're right. Over the years, we've seen aggressive scraping, particularly, really impacting travel customers in many ways. Anything from increasing look to book ratios into the high hundreds, and even sometimes in bad cases into the thousands. Really big impact on site performance. I've seen cases where searches that should take 2-3 seconds have taken kind of upwards of 30 seconds due to the aggressive scraping, which of course is really bad for the user experience, and then obviously that is bad for the travel company. Always see IT departments spending so much time and effort dealing with the scraping that they find it really hard to do their day job and work on other functions. But I guess there are tons of reasons, but ultimately, the constant volume and persistence of the aggressive scraping directly impacts travel companies. It hits their bottom line, both due to revenue loss as well as increased costs.
Yeah, and those wasted man hours you were mentioning earlier. Yeah, absolutely. It's a triple whammy, really, isn't it? No,
it really is. I mean, I think 80. I mean, all three of the key ones that you've highlighted are really bad. But in terms of the volume, and the hassle and the time and the effort, it's definitely the aggressive scraping.
All right, well, thank you.
And thank you, Matt, for making sure that we got to hear that extra little nugget there. And my last question is for you, Matt. So of the 3 attacks that you mentioned, which do you think is the greatest threat to businesses and customers? It seems like the natural fit is ATO.
Yeah. For businesses and customers, I would say ATO. Though you know, your mileage may vary, and obviously each organisation has a different sort of perspective of risk and what worries them and concerns them, and depending on your unique use cases, your unique business situation, you may disagree. But from my perspective, definitely ATO, and that's really because the others are kind of you know with denial of inventory, there's always people may well sort of complete the purchase. Admittedly, someone's scalping off a bit of profit, scraping off a bit of profit off the top. Okay, fair enough, but at least you're making some sales still. With web scraping as well, it's known in the industry. You've probably built your systems around the assumption that you're going to get scraped and so forth, and it causes problems, as Graham was saying, it slows you down and so forth. But the ATO stuff, that's really illegal. That is a sort of very malicious attack. That's people performing identity theft. That's people abusing payment details. That these are people stealing credit cards from your customers and using you as the attack vector. You've got all sorts of brand damage. You've got the potential for GDPR fines from loss of PII, or for just allowing people to use stolen credit cards. You've got the regulatory fines, you've got the chargebacks. There's all sorts of very immediate financial costs, and then you've got the sort of ripples, the sort of fallout from that attack as well, in terms of brand reputation damage, customers taking their business elsewhere because they no longer trust you. As well as sort of the sheer cost of and the sheer number of man hours, sort of staff hours, the number of FTE required to actually repatriate accounts when they're lost en masse. It can be quite painful. Sort of not just it's a protracted pain as well. It's not just a case of, oh, they've taken over the account, let's get it back. It can drag on for months and months, and even if you're getting an investigation from the regulator, it's not just a case of they'll turn up on your doorstep to hand you a fine. They're probably bringing an audit, sort of almost an audit essentially of you and what's happened and so forth, and that's going to suck up more time from your staff as well. So there's all these sort of ripples that fall out from an attack like that. And again, it's the sheer damage it causes both to the organization and to the individual. From a security perspective, I definitely see the ATO as being the most damaging and the worst by far.
Absolutely, like you said, it's that ripple effect that is going to go on, because if you've got the inordinate, so I can't get that word out, inordinate associated costs, and those resources that it requires to kind of clean it up, and then that's even before you get to any fines that you might have from the legislators like the ICO. The one thing you did touch on there, Matt, was the legality of attacks. So scraping, not illegal. ATO is illegal. Do you think that, this is a question from me now rather than from the chat, do you think that the law around bots in the future is likely to change? Do you think we will see greater restrictions?
I think we will likely see greater restrictions. So we have been sort of advising MPs and so forth around some of the sorts of concerns around sort of the scalper bot concerns and so forth. There has been a move internationally as well towards bots being sort of certain types of bots becoming illegal or sort of frowned upon, at least certainly frowned upon. So across Canada, the UK, and the US, for instance, ticket scalping, for events and that sort of thing. That's now sort of legislated against. We're looking at least in the UK, there's some interest in trying to legislate against scalper bots targeting other products, particularly electronic products, and other things that may cause sort of shortages of supply, unnecessary shortages of supply. So there's some concerns around there. Then we're also, I think, in terms of the travel industry, possibly because the travel industry's sort of been almost offline for the last year, essentially because of the pandemic, it's not been explored as much. But I definitely think that there is a sort of movement towards legislation around this sort of thing, around trying to control it and so forth. At the moment, it feels very much like a Wild West. And though I think yeah, I don't think any legislation would perfectly control it, not least because much of this activity could be conducted internationally, and then you get all those questions around jurisdictional disputes, and who is responsible for dealing with what, and how do you apply the law across the internet, sort of one country's legal system on the internet to sort of an attacker somewhere else in the world. There's all those complications, and I don't think really it'll ever really solve the problem, but if it at least frowns on it, it'll dissuade the more legitimate people who do participate in this, at least. And it should also help to restrict it. And it does open up more opportunities for businesses to take steps to try and deal with it as well. Legislation will sort of help to drive businesses. But I think with legislation, it will be important to make sure that we're not sort of punishing the victims of these attacks, which is both the customer and the organization who are targeted.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. That was extremely helpful. And thank you for summing up there. Well, thank you for finishing today's session there with that really insightful glance at what we can expect from bot legislation in the coming years. So to wrap up, thank you everyone for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. We hope that you took away some valuable insights there that will help you with your cybersecurity strategy in the next few months. The webinar will be made available on demand, so you can access the white paper that accompanies this and the webinar itself via the website. If you have any questions about the topics discussed today, or you would like to know more about bots and how they are affecting the travel organisations in 2021, please do contact us at hello@netacea.com. Thank you all, and we hope to see you again very soon.